Hello, and welcome to Insights, Global Data's Strategic Intelligence podcast. At Global Data Strategic Intelligence, we track over 100 tech, industry, ESG, and macro themes impacting all major sectors. I'm Stu Robarts, and today we're discussing a shift towards Britain's booking later, closer, and shorter UK holidays to save money, as reported by the BBC. The trend was highlighted by their recent announcement of Airbnb's Q2 results, with the company warning that economic uncertainty will make for tough months ahead. In the UK specifically, an Airbnb spokesperson told Instant Insights, "We're seeing more Brits embracing spontaneous getaways close to home this year, from stays centred around local pubs to adventure mini breaks in the great outdoors. Rural stays saw a big boost over Easter, with rural family bookings up 71%. And all signs point to a summer where guests are again choosing quieter, affordable places." That's a view shared by James Weatherby, EMEA Head of Strategic Data Advisory at holiday rental analytics provider Key Data.
One of the biggest shifts that we've seen, that we've been tracking this year really, is how much later people are booking. So if you look at the UK market this year, the average booking window is about a week shorter than what we saw in 24. And in fact, a third of reservations in the first half of the year were made within just 14 days of arrival. Those last minute bookings are typically a lower average daily rate as well. It's around £104. So that's been really interesting to see as a trend. We've also seen late booking behavior building for the past 18 months. So this has been something that really now is a default for a large share of guests.
Harry Tomkinson, founder of Shacks, a relatively new operator that offers stays in luxury off-grid cabins, has seen the shift in bookings firsthand.
Yeah, we started taking bookings probably about 3 years ago within our business, and the booking window would be sort of 8 to 12 weeks, something like that, because we're in the short stay holiday market. Recently, in the last 12 months or so, we've seen that shift quite dramatically. So we're now looking at kind of 6 to 8 weeks is our booking windows, even leading up to the summer months. So that's been a big change. It's industry wide as well as within Shacks as well within our business. So just to give you a couple of data points on that, we've seen that on site 27% of our bookings coming into April were actually made 7 days leading up to that booking, which is a big shift. So that's been pretty interesting to watch and kind of adapt to as well.
Both Tomkinson and Weatherby point to the cost of living squeeze as one of the main factors driving the change, alongside none other than the Great British Weather.
Yes, I think it's two things. Number one is cost of living. It's spare cash. So our demographic of people will be kind of anywhere from 20 to 60, but a good chunk of that are people looking at buying their first property or renting, and it's widely reported at how difficult that's becoming. And so the amount of available spare cash for people is becoming less and less. And I think that's leading to, let's just see where we are at the end of the month or see where we are at the beginning of the month, and we can make a last minute call. And then people are sort of, what they'll do is they'll wait for those potential late availability offers. And even during peak season during the summer, we're seeing that more and more and more. And I think a second reason is actually the weather. The British love to talk about the weather, but we've had 2 very bad summers leading up to this one, and I think the lack of confidence, even though we've had a pretty good one this summer, is also leading to that last minute trend where they'll want to just be absolutely sure that when they're making that booking and spending that hard-earned cash, that they're actually going to get a good experience.
There's a number of factors. So I'd say there's not one driving factor, rather it's a combination of many different things. So I think the first driver to talk about is really just the economic reality that many households are facing nowadays. People want to travel, of course, but they're a lot more value conscious. They're holding off to see if they can get a better deal. Many people are just aware that prices often come down the closer you get to your stay. So what they're doing is they're picking shorter breaks to keep the overall spend down. And again, we've seen that mentioned in the BBC article saying operators are saying that guests are just shopping around and committing later. So we have that aspect. We also have the weather impact as well, especially for coastal and rural destinations. We've seen people just a lot more inclined to wait and book when they see a more favorable forecast. And I think a lot of this comes from the lessons that people learned last year, which, obviously it was a terrible summer, and it taught travelers that they don't need to plan so far ahead. There's going to be a risk inherent with that. So instead, just wait a bit more. Then you can decide closer to time, still find good availability, still find some great rates, and you can also do that outside of the peak weeks. So weather's a big factor there. Now, there's also, you've got the OTAs. So platforms like Airbnb and Booking.com, they're not just about making the late bookings possible. In fact, they're promoting it. If you think about the emails you receive or the adverts that you see, often talking about last minute stays, so they're really encouraging that spontaneity. And property managers, they'll lean on those channels to fill those late gaps, which they need, which means they're going to make more supply available at the last minute. But that in turn reinforces that habit for the guests. So it creates this feedback loop almost. Looking back also to last year, there was a lot of noise last year. We had the general election, the Euros, the Olympics, and I mentioned as well the bad summer. And all of this disrupted the patterns that we've historically always, expected. So travelers really learn from all of this and just learn that, look, I can wait, I can book later, can still get something decent. And we've seen that behavior really roll forward into this year. And then finally, I think there's the pricing strategy element too of the operators. What they're doing, the goal there is to really secure those bookings that are booked way far in advance. So they're really about setting ambitious rates early in the season to capture that premium demand, but then understanding they're going to have to reduce those prices later to fill gaps. Now, guests are a lot more savvy now. They know that these patterns happen, so they'll often hold off. Not all of them, of course, but there's a growing cohort of those that are doing that, waiting for that price drop. And then when they do book, they'll often take the days they want rather than, say, a full week. So again, that squeezes stays shorter and it pushes the windows later. So putting all of that together, the backdrop, the weather-led spontaneity, the OTA influence last year, and the way these revenue management strategies are shaping behavior, this is why we see it's not just one factor. There's a lot of different forces that have really just fundamentally changed the how and when behind people booking rentals in the UK.
In terms of the impact, Key Data's research shows that closer bookings and shorter bookings typically mean lower revenues for operators.
We've seen a big impact there when it comes to the like how this has impacted the service providers. Really, it's about the pricing pressure that they've seen at the end of that booking window. When so much of that demand's arriving late and a lower average rate, there's just less room to protect those margins. So unless they're winning those bookings, they're going to end up managing the revenue from a weaker starting point. Shorter stays are another challenge there. There's more changeovers. There's higher operational costs. They increase the risk of those gap nights that I mentioned. So there's 1 or 2 day bookings. It's going to, it becomes harder to fill then. If you can't engineer those gaps, then they're going to leave revenue on the table there. So it's a really important part there too. The shift in distribution is a big factor. So the heavier your reliance is on OTAs, it's going to flatten your RevPAR. So really it's about just that trade-off. You want the occupancy, but how much you're going to sacrifice that ability to control the rates. And that's a really important aspect too. And then not forgetting to mention the owner relations. That's with the property owners for the operators. So volatile pacing and the unpredictable stay lengths that we've seen, it makes the owners themselves quite nervous. They don't necessarily understand the trends in the same way. They might think it's a problem of the agency they're working with, when in reality there's the market-wide trend. That's why we work so tirelessly to sort of promote the market data to give people the bigger picture. Which is why that proactive data-backed communication is really critical. Really, it's about putting into perspective for the owners, what's driving those trends. So, I think there's some really important parts to highlight there. with those.
As an owner, Tomkinson emphasizes the need for adaptability in responding to changes in consumer booking habits.
I think it's a concern if you don't adapt. So what we've done internally here is we've just made our calendar a lot more flexible. So it's not that people are not willing to spend the money. It's just you're having to adapt to the way in which they are now wanting to spend it, if that makes sense. We're not too worried about it because like I said, we're very much focused on adapting and being flexible. And actually, these short-term markets lend themselves really well to the product that we're offering. So we are actually seeing it. Got my kind of entrepreneur's hat on. We're seeing it as an opportunity more than anything else.
He also sees little near-term let-up for the sector while inflation is squeezing household budgets.
Whilst inflation is going the way that it's going to be around for the short to medium term. I would expect this to hang around in some form, just in the same way as COVID made a huge difference on our lives in lots of different ways, like working from home and actually to a degree these type of holidays as well. And that will stay around in some form. But if the economy improves, I would expect people to revert back slightly to those longer booking windows and longer duration stays.
Finally, Weatherby agrees that later and shorter bookings are here to stay for the time being, but he suggests that finding a balance between shorter and longer length bookings is key for operators.
Really, what our data indicates, and what we see with that is the whole late and short. Really think that's going to remain the baseline for at least the next 6 to 12 months. Again, we've established this as a trend based on a lot of the factors that we see in the UK. They're certainly not going away. Nothing's changing there in terms of the unpredictability about the weather, in terms of the strategies when it comes to how to manage your rates, in terms of the strategies of the OTAs, in terms of filling and advertising those short-term stays. I don't believe any of that will change, and therefore operator behavior is going to adapt to that even increasingly so. So I think late and short is certainly here to stay short term. Remains to be seen about the long term. But really, when it comes to the data and the performance, I think the ADR, the average daily rate, should hold up there with the pricing. But I think it's RevPAR that's really going to be more sensitive, because that's about the balance between the rate and the occupancy. So operators, again, the most of the revenue that they get, the highest performing part of their bookings, are from bookings that are made much further in advance. Any operator dealing with data understands that that's where they secure most of their revenue. So that a smart operator in that sense is going to really put extra focus into that, understanding that there's more of a risk with these short-term stays. So really, again, it's that balancing act there. So don't rely too heavily on the short-term ones. At the same time, understand that it's a necessary part of your strategy there. And then moving forward, I think there'll be a slight re-lengthening of stays if hopefully household budgets improve, weather gets more favourable. People might start looking, domestic travel might change in terms of people seeking to travel more abroad there. And I think OTA is going to drive a lot of that behaviour there as well. So it'll be interesting to see if lead times return to pre-pandemic norms. But ultimately, it's going to be the winners are going to be decided by those who can operate in both of those worlds there.
That's all we've got time for today. Thanks to our guests, James Weatherby and Harry Tomkinson, for their insights. And thanks to you all for listening. From all of us at Global Data Strategic Intelligence, see you next time.